Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we are working on the bed and this is really getting exciting. It's starting to come together. We're working on the hash work up top here, and these are a lot of pieces, a lot of half laps, a lot of mortise and tenon. It's gonna be a fun project. So let's dive in and take a look at how we do this. The hash work on this is made out of a bunch of pieces that are 1 inch wide by a 1/2 inch thick. Now everything I had was pre-planed down to about 3/4 inch thick, and so I needed to take all 40 of these sticks and plane them down from 3/4 down to 1/2 inch. That sounds like a lot of work, but because they're so thin, the blade covers them really quickly, and it really only takes 40 seconds or so to take each one to a close shave. I think I may have spent 1.5 minutes on each one of these, so it doesn't take that long at all to plane them all down to a perfectly smooth surface and get them all to the same width. Now that we have 40 of these sticks to length, we need to actually start laying out all of the half lap marks. And I'm just going to be marking one side of each of the half lap with my story stick. So I made one ahead of time and I can make them all match that. I'm only going to mark 1/2 of the half lap with that. And that will allow me to mark the other half with the exact width of the actual stick. Also in the end, I'll be marking off the tenons, and these are little 1/4 inch stubs that stick off, and they'll end up being about 1/4 inch wide by about 3/4 inch long. And then we want to label everything. It's very important because we have 40 of these sticks that all look alike, that they all be labeled, what hash they're out of and what place in the hash, what connects to what, where they go. Otherwise they get very, very confusing, and if one piece gets out of place, it can mess up the entire bed structure. Now I'm going to be marking these out, so I made one side mark and I'll use the stick to mark the other side. And then once I have these little nicks in there, then I can come into the square and draw perfectly square lines across. These will tell me where I need to cut. And I can then cut down halfway through the stick. And I'm going to cut through halfway on one stick and halfway on the other stick. That way they lap over each other. So here I'm using the marking gauge to mark out where halfway is. And this will allow me to actually get the same depth on every stick. So even if the mark isn't exactly halfway, as long as I always measure from the front of the stick, I can get the right amount on both sticks. And so now we need to cut down on those marks we made halfway into the board. You see the mark that I'm going to stop at right there. And once we've cut both sides of the half lap cut, then we can remove the waste. At this point, I'm also going to nick in the tenon, so I'm just making a single pass or so on each edge, cutting in just a little ways. I don't need to cut in much in order to make the tenon on these. So I can use the bench hook or a paring hook to come in and remove the waste. I want to remove from one side and then turn around and remove the other half from the other side. Stay away from the line as long as possible and then clean up to the line. You'd be amazed at how smooth you can actually get it. If you take your time, you can do it all with a chisel and don't need to bring in a hand router. But I have a hand router, so why not use it? And it's a fun tool to have. This is one of those tools that even in a power tool shop, I would definitely have a hand router because it just makes everything so much more fun and simple. But this allows me to then clean out the gap a little bit better, get it a little bit smoother in the bottom. I don't need these to be terribly smooth. I'm probably going to put a little bit of glue on them, but I don't need much at all in order to connect them together. So the surface isn't going to be seen inside. It doesn't have to be perfect, but cleaning up always feels good. Once we have cleaned these out, then we can actually come and test them all. And this is where the rubber meets the road. Each of these sticks, because everything was hand done, is a slightly different width, and just a few shavings one way or the other. And so I measured and marked every single one of these grooves to match its corresponding stick at the location that it will be fitting into. And then we can come back through and just make sure everything is the way we want it. If we need to take off a shaving and smooth things out, then we can come back in and do that. This is also the chance we can shave off the tenons, and since we cut in a little ways, we can chop them out. And so I just had a mortising gauge come in and mark the width of the tenon, and we can pop off all 4 sides, quick and easy, and there's a tenon. I like doing it this way. It's just fast and easy. And if there's any run out in the grain, then you can bring a chisel in and clean it up, and it's as good as new. Happiness. You can see how this one is at a slight angle. I don't care about these being perfectly long. There's always going to be a gap at the end of the tenon. I'm always making the mortices deeper than the tenon will reach. I'm not even going to be gluing these into the frame. They just house in place and hold them there. So once we have that, then we can test this whole thing, pound it all together, and we want to make sure there's a nice tight fit between every joint. Everything is, well, fitting well. Now we need to create a bunch of mortices. And since we have 40 sticks, that means 80 mortices. Excuse me, we have 20 sticks, it means 40 mortices. One on the end of each stick. So 40 tenons and 40 mortices. So we need to take apart the frame that we had last time. And I want to take the legs off, but I want to actually keep the frame together because I need to mark on the frame where the hash work intersects with the frame. And then I also need to mark on the hash work where it intersects with the frame so that I can get those marks between the two and I can fit each hash to its section on the frame. Don't ever assume that the frame is perfect because we are all humans and we make mistakes and there might be ever so slight differences one way or the other. This is the best way to make sure you can get a gap-free fit up is that you fit your hash to the frame. You want to actually mark the frame where the hash covers it and then go back through and mark the hash where the frame hits it. And this will give you the marks that you can create the shoulders of your tenon. So what I did was I created one tenon on one end of every stick. And that then gave me a starting point so I could set that tenon up against the frame. And then I can mark the other end where the other shoulder should be. And this way I can guarantee that I have a nice clean work. On some of these I didn't put a tenon on either end, and like this one I just laid it in place, clamped it down, and then I marked them all out. Once we have all those little nick marks in all of the boards, then we can bring the square in and mark them off. So here I'm marking the shoulder where it intersects with the board. And at that point I only want to cut in a little ways the shoulder of the tenon, and then I want to move it about a 1/4 inch away from that shoulder that we just created. So I'll be cutting them off at about a 1/4 inch. I ended up just eyeballing them. And here you can see I'm actually setting a 1/4 inch chisel on there and then marking, it's about a 1/4 inch there. That mark just gives me an eyeball location that I can cut off the excess. And then we can do a slight nick in here at the shoulder of the tenon and a slight nick in here at the shoulder of the tenon. And this is what we can then pare back to when we did with the chisel. So cut the board to length and then tin it in. Here's the mortise gauge I was talking about earlier, which that way I can make sure I make the tenon the exact same width as the chisel I'm going to be using to make the mortises. And then pop. I just like this part. This is so much fun. Now we need to lay out where the mortises will be. We put out the edges of where the hash will intersect with the board, but now I need to actually lay out the precise locations of the tenons that we just created. And because I cut all those tenons by hand, they're all ever so slightly different in size. And then we can lay that in there, and then we can set up the mortise gauge to set up to exactly how wide these mortises need to be. And we can set that up to our chisel that we're using so that the chisel cuts the precisely width groove. It cuts the right width groove. Wow, having problems. Rather than chopping these like I normally would with a mortise, they're only a 1/4 inch deep, so I find it easier to cut in a stop and then pare out the waste, sort of like how a plowing plane would do it, but without the sole. Once we pare those all out, then we can test the frame and fit it into the piece. And I'll do each side of this frame one at a time. There will be the stiles that it has to go into, the rails that it has to go into, and then it has to go into the bottom stretcher and the top stretcher. And at each one of these locations, there are 2 or 3 mortise and tenons that all have to be the same spot, the same width, and the same spacing away. And so you have to be very careful. Every one of these is individually cut for its tenon, and every tenon is made slightly different. So every mortise will be made slightly different. And so I'm just taking my time and making sure that every one of them is laid out and precise. I can just use a little depth gauge to make sure that everything is down to depth. Even if you put a small dowel through a piece of wood, it works the exact same way. And then we can test this one. And these with the 3 are a little bit harder to put in. Once you actually get all the hash work in, they get even harder to put in because you have, 15 points that have to go together. Now the tenons that have to go into the large legs, I need to put it in most of the way, and then I mark out where the tenon actually intersects with the leg. Then I can pull the structure back out and go back over and then chop out the waist with the chisel just like I did before. But you can't actually mark those out the same way because the leg sticks out farther than the boards will. So now we can use this to then lay out precisely where it is in the leg. So same thing as before, stop cut on either end, and then pare out to the stop cut, and whoop, don't go too far. Thankfully my chisel is a little high there, so I didn't actually gouge it out. But just take your time, and you can create a great little 1/4 inch deep mortise. A lot of little fun here. So once we get these all cut in, then we can actually come back with the frame and test it, make sure that it is fitting in and happy. And then again, we can test with the depth gauge, make sure that they're all the right size. This is kind of the point where I'm starting to get worried, as I've cut all of the mortises and I've cut all of the tenons, and I've tested each one individually, but I haven't tested them all as an entire system. And if you take your time and you make sure everything is right individually, then they should all come together as a single unit. But you never know until you pound them all together. Unfortunately, I don't have footage of putting the whole thing together, but you'll see it here in just a moment. And I'm actually really happy with how it came out. Hee. Lots of hash. It's getting there, and I'm really looking forward to this. Hopefully next time we're going to be putting the top on and making the top and a whole lot of sliding dovetails, connecting the top to the top stretchers, and then the time after that it's going to be putting on the side rails, and I think I'll just have a finished video after that. So we're getting close to the end. I'm happy. I'm looking forward to taking this upstairs and putting it into the bedroom. It is getting to be really heavy, but thankfully with this, I think 2 people can carry it as opposed to the table, which required more than 2 people. So if you have any questions or ideas, let me know down below. I'd love to hear those. I do like reading through all of the comments, and I respond to as many as I possibly can. So I hope you like that. If you do, please let me know. I'd love to hear that. I think this is about it for today, and until next time, have a wonderful day. So in this video, we are going to be aiding and abetting this project.